good evening, everyone. Sorry for the little delay there. Just want to make sure everyone on Facebook could also follow us too, which is what this little contraption here is in the middle of our walkway. So thank you very much for coming out tonight. We're always really appreciate the Center at Belvedere having us out for these events. They're great partners. Those joining us on Facebook, thank you as well. We're going to have a Q&A session after the speaker presentation. So for those of you here, keep that in mind as the presentation's going. Questions pop into your head. And for those on Facebook, they can put it in the comments section. I have just a few announcements before we get started. Tomorrow, February 14th, our own research librarian, Miranda Burnett, will be doing a program at the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library at 11 a.m. On Into the Archives, African American Ancestors. So she will do an introduction to African American genealogy in Charlottesville and Albemarle County, and help people learn about the resources that are available. We have a great partnership with JMRL, with Miranda, who runs the library and our archives in the Historical Society, but she is a staff member with JMRL. So we're very happy to have that partnership. So that's tomorrow, downtown Central Library, 11 a.m. You'll find on your seats a flyer for some of our upcoming programs in February. We have 2 film screenings. We have on February 20th at 6 p.m., again at JMRL in the Swanson Room on the 3rd floor, Raised, which is co-directed, co-written, co-produced by filmmaker Lorenzo Dickerson with Mopintown Media and journalist Jordy Yeager. So it was done through Virginia Public Media. It's been out there for a little while, but we're going to have a program there with Preservation Piedmont, JMRL, and ourselves co-sponsoring a film screening. And then on February 25th at 2 p.m. At the Lighthouse Studio Theater, a great friend of ours, a lady that we've been working with, Pam Smith, is putting together a film for teachers and students and anyone interested in understanding about our democracy and fighting for the right to know the truth about our history. That film is called Current, A Descendant's Journey for Truth. Pam's connection is through the Lewis family in Albemarle, where she is the descendant of slaves who were enslaved by the Lewis family here. And she's trying to tell a whole truth history of how we need to better understand our entire past. So you can find information on the flyers on your seats. For Facebook, you can go out to our website, albemarlehistory.org. You can find links and all the information there. For those who weren't able to make it tonight, and as you can see from the crowd, Richard draws a crowd. Thank you, Richard. We're probably going to do an encore of this in March. So if any of your friends couldn't make it tonight, they want to see it again, we're going to try to do that in March. And also coming up in April, we're organizing a panel discussion on the history and future of Court Square. So we were working with the archaeologists as they were trying to understand Swan Tavern, as if you drive downtown and try to get past the Levy building nowadays and everything's blocked. Well, the new courthouse is going up on where the Swan Tavern used to be. There's also been work in the Jackson Park, where Jackson used to be, to understand more about McKee Row, and then also understand more about the history of the enslaved people who were sold through Court Square. So we're going to try to put together a panel discussion about what's going on, what's the history and the future of that look like. And also the city parks are doing a master plan on the parks. So we're trying to also gain input in terms of what people want to do with these parks now that there's just green area that's open for ideas. So with the flyer on your about February, please take that home. Hopefully you can make those programs. There's also a brochure telling you a little bit more about us and the work that we're doing. So I hope you take a look. And there's so much more to come, so keep in contact. But again, we'll get on with the program. I'm Tom Chapman, Executive Director for the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society. The Wizard of Oz behind the Facebook screen is Sterling Howe. He's our programs manager. Always, we're very appreciative for the Center at Belvedere for having us. This is an installment of our Historical Society Speaker Series. We're thrilled to have with us Richard Guy Wilson to speak on Colonial Revival architecture in Charlottesville and Virginia. So he's going to help us answer the question is, what is Charlottesville's architecture? While it's many things, Richard's going to give us all the insight that he's gained over his many years of experience. Richard is the Commonwealth Professor Emeritus in Architectural History at the University of Virginia. His many books, articles, and exhibits focus on different aspects of American and modern architecture, including Thomas Jefferson and the Colonial Revival, which we'll hear about tonight. And Richard was also an expert tour guide on our Walls of Worship tour last spring, helping our guests understand the intricacies of the Albemarle County Courthouse, its history as a common temple for the people, and we're happy to have him back to talk with us tonight. So Richard, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Are we okay? Okay, well, I'm very honored to be here, and thank you for coming out. My talk tonight it sounds simple, but it's actually rather complex and goes in a number of different angles, and there are a couple of thorns that stick in the side depending on where it is that you want to go. But the two buildings I'm showing you here, I think you all know them, right? These show, I mean, I would say this is the Colonial Revival, but they show different sides of the Colonial Revival and the way that it's happened. Whoops, here we go. So the building right here, of course, this is one that we all should know because this is now the Historical Society's building. It started out as the library, and then the library moved around the corner up to where the courthouse, the old courthouse, and is up there. But the architect of this is Walter Dabney Blair, and he's sort of an unknown figure, but he was actually a Virginian. He was born here in Virginia, in Amelia County. He attended the University of Virginia, not in architecture, because we didn't have an architecture school in those days. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. And then from here, he went up to the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied architecture, and then off to Paris, where the upper class architects always went, to the École des Beaux-Arts and studied there. And then he came back to this country and settled himself up in, set up practice in New York City. But he had this connection and so forth down here to Virginia, so that you can see that, I mean, he is, there's a building of his on Monument Avenue there. And what you can see about him is, well, he likes a lot of columns, right? That's one of his, that's one of his features. He did other buildings here at the university. I'm showing you on the left, this is a drawing that his firm produced for Cobb Hall. Cobb Hall is still there. That was the chemical laboratory originally here at UVA. And on the right is Monroe Hall. And what is interesting, I think, about these is the way that he is attempting to continue on the UVA look of red brick, a lot of columns, the classical sort of continuation, so forth. So that's one of the people that I introduced. The other person is here, and I showed you a minute ago, and I'm sure you all know this. Where is it?
Pantops.
Hey, Pantops, okay. Unfortunately, it's lost its hat, as you can see. But this is Stanislaw Makielski. I'll be coming back to Stan in a little while. He was a very important local architect here, but shows the way that buildings change and so forth over time, but also the different ways that this sort of colonial revival, or this sort of revival of Jeffersonian, the way that it continues and is put in, and is put into other uses. Here is another building that you all know on the right, I assume, if you go up and down Rugby Road at all. Of course, is the Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church that you can see he designed in 1945-47. But Stan Makielski is just one of a group of architects here in town in the first half of the 20th century that I'd say really made the view of the town. And so another person who we'll be coming back to very briefly is Marshall Wells, and this is a house on Rugby Road as well. And it just shows the way that this becomes a sort of the standard, becomes a standard. But of course the question is, what is it that makes a town's identity? And of course part of it is okay, how do you get into town? What is it that you look when you come to town? What is it you see? And, you know, these are just some examples right here. On the bottom right, of course, is one of our great treasures, is the Main Street and so forth. But these other buildings are certainly also very much a part, we're not other buildings, of sign, but signs are part of our landscape that's out there. But Barracks Road and so forth is that. So this is just some example. What I'm trying to argue here is that it depends on where you're looking, how you come in, what is it that you see that makes it that you say, okay, this is my place. Now there are other buildings as well, and I am one of these people that's always out there peering around, running around town and so forth, taking pictures here and there. But these are two buildings right here that have a sort of an interesting history, because the one on the left was where African Americans would stay when they came to town in the late 19th, early 20th century, because they were not allowed to stay, you know, in any of the standard hotels or anything like that. And so this, the building on the left on Dice Street was apparently used for that. The one on the right, and this is a little bit questionable, actually, whether this is the building or not, and I haven't been able to do all the research, but this apparently was an opera house or a place where there was a lot of parties and so forth. That was also held for the African American population here, because of course they weren't allowed to be in some of the other things. So the point is that you have different levels of layers of history, and these buildings have different sorts of meanings. And that we need to keep this in mind, even though what I'm going to focus on is sort of the elite side of town here, but that there are many more. But then it comes back to another question, and that is, okay, what is it that makes identity? And again, it's the buildings, but also what's the history? And we are here in Charlottesville, either blessed or damned, depending on how you want to look at it, with the heritage of that guy that, you know, that sat up on top of a hill up there, and is created, though, and any way that you want to look at it, Monticello or the University of Virginia are two of the great World Heritage sites here, and are known almost, I would say, around the country. And that this is sort of interesting, the way that his finger helped to create what it is that helped to create what it is. Now, at the same time of saying this, and to say that these are Colonial Revival, is to point out that the Colonial Revival can be all over the place. These are buildings that you can see that, you know, it depends where it is that you're looking and so forth, that you can see churches, see service stations, see houses, you can see the museum at the university, that these are just some of the tremendous variety of this. But then there is the whole question is really, what is colonial? Dun, da, dun, da, dun. Officially speaking, what is colonial is from the earliest settlement by the Anglo-Saxons or the Europeans up to, of course, when we got our independence. And then that's the end of the colonial period. And so officially speaking, buildings like this, and this shows a little bit of the variety, and Bacon's Castle is one of the earliest surviving buildings in the Commonwealth, but also in the eastern United States. But then, and of course it was a big house at the time, but it's sort of interesting the way that you know have an evolution from that into something that is Westover, which is, you know, who doesn't want to live in Westover, right? I mean, no, or a house like that. I mean, this is a very, very it has had a tremendous impact. But at the same time, is this really colonial? No. These are buildings after the Declaration of Independence, after we separated from England, and there's nothing that architectural historians or historians like better than dividing up history and putting labels on it, label. And so that you get here, this is officially speaking, if you look in some of the textbooks, this would be called architecture of the federal period or of the republic period. That this is not really colonial because we were no longer colonial. And I'm just putting in a wonderful federal house up in Massachusetts. Don't worry, I won't show you too many Massachusetts buildings here, but just to sort of point out that you do have this. And then this leads to the other issue, and I mentioned earlier, is that the Colonial Revival has many different angles and layers and so forth that go through it, and that you can get a whole bunch of different sorts of things. So whether Colonial Williamsburg, and this is all a recreation, and I would argue is one of the most important tastemakers of the 20th century in this country has been CW. That the creation of CW and what went on down there has really helped to shift, really helped to create American taste. But then Galveston Hall out of Farmington, the Farmington area out there, shows just again the different directions and so forth. I think one of you here knows where this is, but does anybody know where this is? What it is? You want to say it? Tell us. And I mean, this is, I'll be coming back to Milton Grigg several times in here and so forth, but this is, I think, very, very interesting because it does show the way that we did spread out, and that some of these local yokels, you might say, Uncle Milty, but the way that we spread out and went other places and so forth, and that is to say, this is what it is. But saying this also, and again, I am a historian, and so I've got to make everything as damn complicated as possible so that you can't understand it. We have to keep in mind that there are many other colonials that existed. It isn't just Virginia, that we did have, here we are up in Newport, Rhode Island, a very, very, very handsome house on the left. It's actually wood. They've carved the wood to try to make it look like it's stone, but it's actually wood. Or on the right, this is one of the earliest houses that survive up there, the Parson Capon House, which just again shows that this is all part of this colonial period. And so there isn't any one style to it at all. Rather than that, you have this variety. You have this variety. Or right here. There were somebody else other than the Brits that were over here. And the early history, and it depends where you go, but especially if you go out to the Southwest or California, the Spanish legacy is a very, very important legacy out there with the so-called 21 missions that run up the coast of California, or go down to, well, there's a big event taking place down there today, I think, right? Mardi Gras. But this is Madame John's legacy. And again, the mission revival picks up. Now, the one on the left, this is one of the weirdest of all of them, and so forth. This is sort of mission gone crazy, but you do find this. I mean, and again, if you're like me and you poke around and so forth, you will see this. Or you go down to New Orleans, and this is sort of Richard Koch, a very important architect down there. But he is picking up, I mean, to go back for a minute, he's picking up there in Madame John's legacy with this, with the Price House. So this is all just sort of a part of what I'm trying to say, is that this isn't really just one simple story here, that there is a whole bunch of different stories that are going on, and shows the complexity of the architecture, but also the complexity of this country. So you all know that we're not just one simple sort of thing. The other thing is keep in mind that the Colonial Revival, while I'm here just talking about architecture, there are other sides to it. And there's the whole historical literature, the historical novels and so forth. Thomas Nelson Page, a very, very important, somewhat forgotten today, but a very important Virginia-based writer who did a whole bunch of these early historical novels that went back, and that's, of course, that's the way that they danced around back there in the 18th century. But then also, and I'm not going to be able to go into this, but another whole story is the decorative arts and the way that it actually invades. It's not just the outside of buildings, it actually invades the inside and into the furniture the furniture, the wallpaper, and all of that. And then another element to this the colonial pops up everywhere. And, you know, you just can't help but, I mean, after all, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, what were they doing there? They were drinking away. But all of this is part of the, all of this is part of that. Now, for a minute here, I'm going to back up for a second. What is going on with the Colonial Revival here in the United States is part of a much bigger thing that was going on, I would say, in the Western world, beginning in the later 18th century and continuing and then really gaining momentum in the 19th century, and that is the creation of national identity. The different countries want to have their identity, and you begin to have this sort of, you know, I am this, I am not that, I'm part of this, I'm not part of that, and so forth. And so part of the national identity is then, okay, can't we create buildings that say that that's part of us? And for us here in this country, we are, yes, we're independent from that king over there in England, but still at the same time, or that queen in England, depending, but still at the same time, in many ways, we are cultural heirs. That the English influence is a very, very big influence on us culturally and socially in this country. And so that you do get in England, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, but you know, you do get them with their Houses of Parliament. What are they looking at here? They're looking back to the 13th century. And creating this brand new building that's going to be their center of their government, that this is what they see themselves as being. And as I say, so this sort of a creation of, well, we've got to look back there and see what, that we've got to look back there and see what it is, you know, and so that you do get, and this is just me, that, you know, you get these statues and so forth. So what begins to happen over here? Well, on the left is arguably one of the very first American hysterical paintings. And there's a couple, John Trumbull did a couple versions of this, one of which hangs in the rotunda at the United States Capitol. But it is, can we reach back and create our history that is separate from those damn Brits over there and so forth, that this can be us. And so this is part of this sort of, this creation of this identity. And then what is very interesting is the way that, and I'm not going to go into this very much, but the way that Washington is portrayed. And I mean, Washington is a farmer. You know, I mean, this becomes another element that is another element. But then there are other ways of trying to create the identity. And for instance, right here on the left, beginning in about 1810, and then gaining great momentum in the 19th century, was that America was really the place of nature. That we had all of these wonderful nature derived elements here, and I'm just using Frederick Church's here, Niagara Falls, but that this this is very much a part of it. And there's also the literature that gets into this. For instance, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. What did Longfellow write? Name one title. The Midnight Ride of somebody? Hiawatha? Evangeline? I mean, this is looking back and creating an American, you understand, an American identity here, identity through this. Longfellow, I happen to be a big fan of Longfellow. He wrote a novel named Cavala, and in the novel, he has this description going on. He says that, and this is a dialogue that's going on between two individuals. And one says, "We want a national literature commensurate with our mountains and rivers, commensurate with Niagara and the Alleghenies." This is one thing. But then somebody else says, well, wait a minute. We need something else. Isn't there something else that is here that corresponds to the size of the country? And so they get into this big debate here, and it's rather interesting. You get this thing here that westward from hand to hand we pass the lighted torch, but is it lighted at the old domestic fireplace of England? And so there is this continuation and so forth. And this is, and I can't emphasize just how important Henry Wadsworth Longfellow is. And so I'm just putting in here on the right, but this is one of a series of very, 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 very popular photographs that were reproduced in endless quantities by Wallace Nutting that showed another side. And so this is, these are two different sides here of what is America, what's it like, and so forth. I mean, this is where your damn rugs come from and so forth. There is this way. Or here. This is, of course, one of the most important buildings in our history. But how do we know it? The original tower was like on the left. But in 1828, William Strickland, who was a very important architect, added the tower to it on the top. And of course, just whammo, this goes beyond all belief, the tower. And this is the way that we view the building today. But in reality, back there when they were doing the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, they had no idea that the thing would look like this, like this. And so what I'm trying to suggest here is that there is a fictional element, that there's a fiction that runs through our history and runs through our architecture, and that you just can't, you've got to keep that in mind. Or here. Washington Irving, the great author of Rip Van Winkle, Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He wrote a biography of George Washington. On the right, that is a painting by John Queodore of Rip Van Winkle, waking up and coming back to life there. But Washington Irving created a house for himself up on the Hudson River, right outside of Tarrytown, New York. Anybody ever been there? It's a wonderful place. This is one of the places you might say where American fiction began, and that's his house there. It's a little questionable exactly who was the architect on it, and there's been some work that there was maybe a man, John Harvey. But anyway, that's the house. There is a rendering. What's the date? 1656. It was built in 1835. You get the idea? I mean, after all, he was a novelist and so forth. But the point is here that there is this attempt to really create this history. Now, another extremely important element is historic preservation. And one of the earliest of the HPs, the historic preservations, is, of course, is the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. If you don't know, Mount Vernon was in horrible, horrible shape and was actually maybe going to be torn down. And this group of ladies, and there are some Southern ladies in there, in the center of it was Anne Pamela Cunningham, and that is her seated right here. You can see who else is right here. George has showed up in this. But they gathered together a tremendous amount of, well, a lot of money, and they were able to purchase Mount Vernon and to restore it. And this is the beginning of this, what you might say is historic preservation in this country, is preserving these very, very, very important buildings of the past. And of course, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but Mount Vernon catches on and becomes just an image that you find absolutely everywhere. For instance, at the World's Columbian Exposition held in Chicago in 1893, this is a giant World's Fair that was held in Chicago. We had tried an earlier one back in 1876 in Philadelphia. It didn't go very well. But this is the great one here with this great court of honor and all of this. But each of the states built their own building, and you know, you can figure out what our building is there and what's the Virginia building. And it shows up again at the Paris World's Fair, 1931, over there in Paris, and of course becomes ubiquitous. I could do just about 3 hours of just showing you FACO Mount Vernons. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you too many of these here. But I mean, it is so. I mean, it's so interesting the way that certain elements, and especially that very strange porch on the damn thing, just catches on and catches on. Here is a very interesting one here. If you don't know, Sears Roebuck produced houses that came in kits and so forth, and they produced these beginning about 1906 and went up into the 1930s. And this is out of the Sears Roebuck catalog, I think of 1931 or 32. And what is interesting, it is the Jefferson, you can see. But it says it's the Jefferson design along the same lines as historic Mount Vernon. What the hell are they doing? But again, this is the way the history gets mixed up in this fictional element and so forth. And so, again, you can just run around town and you're going to see plenty of these. You can see plenty of these. Some of them very diminutive, but others that are others more accurate. Another very, very important, I think, for us is this is what we might say is the Jefferson Revival. And the Jefferson Revival begins in 1892 here at the University of Virginia when they decide to add a gymnasium. And keep in mind, this is an all-male school at the time. And they decide to add a gymnasium, and they hire this New York firm by the name of Carpenter and Peebles. And Mr. Peebles, in particular, is a Virginian. He had gone north to study and so forth, but they set up a firm down in Norfolk, Virginia, and they become the architects for Fairweather Hall. And it's not too hard to see that where it is. You all know where it is, but you look over to the lawn and so forth is over there. And so this is one of the very earliest examples of what we might say is a Jeffersonian revival. And I'm just showing you in the bottom. Today it's the art history department and so forth. And it's gone through many, many changes over the years. Actually, the architecture school was once located there. But that's the way the interior was, is the gymnasium. They're the guys that started. Carpenter and Peebles are the people that really start this sort of a Jefferson revival. But then there is the big event. Of 1895, and in the rebuilding of it, they decide that they go to a very famous New York firm, probably the most famous architecture firm in the country at the time, McKim, Mead, and White. And McKim, and White were doing lots of things everywhere, and it was unbelievable that they agreed to come down and do this. But it turns out that McKim had actually visited the University of Virginia back in 1892 and was just impressed. He couldn't believe, I never heard of this damn place. What the hell is going on? Because it really wasn't known in any sort of way. And so when it came up after the fire, they got into it. And so they're the people that rebuilt the rotunda, though the rotunda has been changed a number of times since then. But they also they also do Cabell Hall, or now Old Cabell Hall, which is south end of the lawn, and the two buildings on either side. But what is going on is that there is this. I mean, Colonial Revival and Jefferson Revival are sort of the same thing, even though Jefferson's architecture really isn't really from that period. And so that you do get their work. Peebles' firm, he separates from Carpenter, does the Minor Hall. Then another big event that happens is that in 1916, a book was produced by the man on the right, Sidney Fiske Kimball, but he just liked to go by his middle name, not by Sidney, who was a Pennsylvania-born, had gone to Harvard and got both an architecture degree and then studied history and ultimately got a PhD. And he's one of the very first, I think, that gets this in history. And he gets involved and does a book. This is not the first book. There had been a book published a year and a half earlier that's sort of forgotten today. But he publishes his book on Thomas Jefferson, architect, and really helps to bring Jefferson back into the bigger sway. Because who knew about, as I said, who knew about the University of Virginia? Who knew about the work? Who knew about the work that was down here? So anyway, what happens is, publishing this book in 1916, in 1919, they decide to start a school of architecture, or excuse me, a department of architecture here at the University of Virginia, and they hire him to come down. And so Fiske comes to here to the University of Virginia. He only stays 4 years. He leaves in 1923 to go up to Philadelphia, become the director of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and has a major career up there. But what he does while he is here, and there he is, and there's the architecture fraternity scattered across there, and we're going to be talking about a couple of these people in just a few minutes. And I just ought to put in, ladies, that he did have a wife, and that Marie was apparently very, very important in getting him to do his damn work, because he tended to just sort of procrastinate quite a bit, and she's the person that would get him to sit down there, Fiske, and begin to write this and do that, and do that, and so forth. So anyway, what we have here is that he's the person that starts a school of architecture here at the University of Virginia. He also is involved in the design of a number of buildings. These are two right here that he's involved with. Mim Jim, which is not completed till after he leaves, though I should say he keeps his finger into the University of Virginia endlessly. The faculty apartments. This is his scheme, which was never built, but this is the engineering school that was going to be up in the Lewis Mountain area. But Fiske does keep his fingers very, very much into things around here. And while he is up at Philadelphia, he does come back here frequently, advises on the architecture at the University of Virginia, and he ultimately builds his own house that's outside of town, just a little bit west of town, Shack Mountain, and this is sort of his retirement home. The other important thing, and this is where the drums really begin to roll here, dump-da-dump-da-dump-da-dump, is that Abby Aldrich Rockefeller gets the idea, couldn't something be done down there next to the College of William and Mary where Williamsburg was located? And she's the person that gives the money that sets up the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. And anyway, in this foundation are a number of individuals who are very, very, very important. And Fiske is one of the major leaders in it. And so this is Fiske right here. Right over here, we'll be meeting this in a minute. This is Milton Grigg here. But these are individuals, a lot of these are UVA alums and so forth, who go down to Colonial Williamsburg and do work down there and help and help to create it. The other thing is that they also, Fiske is very involved in the restoration of Monticello. And Monticello over the years, there's a long history here, I'm not going to go into it, gone through a number of different hands, it's gotten into bad shape and so forth, but he takes over the committee on this. And once again, the man on the very left here, this is Milton Grigg that does this. Milton Grigg is one of the early graduates of the architecture school. And in his own way, an extremely important individual. His firm goes through a number of different names. I won't go through all of them, but it still is in existence today. But he was very prominent here in Charlottesville. And I should say that, as just a personal note, the very first public lecture I ever gave at the University of Virginia was in the late fall of 1976. And afterwards, this man came up to me and shook my hand, and it was him. He had come to this lecture. And so we got to be sort of, not good friends, but I got to know him over the years. And I should say that Doug Gilpin has done a wonderful essay on him and his like. Anyway, but Milton becomes a major figure here. This is one of the schemes for the lawn up at Monticello. This is a proposed entrance that never happened, but where they were going to use a couple of the old buildings there and created this into the entrance for it. But Milton becomes a major figure around town, and these are just some of his drawings of different buildings and so forth over the years, and it does show a little bit of the variety, though at the same time it is in this sort of a colonial type of vein. Unfortunately, this no longer exists, but used to be there in West Main Street, and is a sort of, what you might say is a little bit of Colonial Williamsburg. It's been picked up and plopped down on West Main Street here, on West Main Street. Here are a couple more of his works that are around town, the expansions and so forth, to the courthouse, houses that are around town. Here are a few more. These are some of the ones that are interesting, and it does show, I mean, there is a sort of Jeffersonian element in the house there on the left. It's on University Circle, but still at the same time, he's sort of, quote, what you can say, modernized it in some sort of way, you might say, and so forth. Then there are other architects who are very important in helping to create the town in these years, and the image that we see, whether it is Eugene Bradbury, who does a bunch of work around town, since St. Paul's down in the corner, or Galveston Hall out there at Farmington by Stanhope Johnson. This man is extremely important, and as you can see, he was a real charmer. Stanislaw Makielski. And Makielski taught at the School of Architecture here at the university for many years, produced a whole series of different architects and so forth. He was also a very good watercolorist, and there are a bunch of these that are still around. There was a display of these a little while back, somewhere around here. But he does, for instance, if you've ever wondered about those huge apartment buildings in Preston Court, his papers are at the University of Virginia in the archives and so forth. And this is a drawing for them, but the amount of Makielski work around town is tremendous. If you're ever going up Barracks Road from the corner, coming up Barracks Road, there's these little red brick houses along there, and that's Stan. You can see them peering through the trees and so forth. This is an advertisement that was in the newspaper a little bit ago, but I just thought it was sort of interesting of putting in. But that he's incredibly important, and he does work at the university, and this is under WPA. Some of the money coming out of the New Deal and so forth, but the rebuilding of the steps and the foundations and so forth around the rotunda. And then just a note, and this is an interesting thing that I just sort of was, when I was putting together this talk, began that he did do buildings at other places. And one here is at Voorhees College down in South Carolina. The other one at St. Paul's School in Lawrenceville, Virginia. And these are African American schools. These are African American schools, and apparently he donated his time to doing these buildings there. But these are two very early African American schools. You can see right here the chapel on the left, and then this is a dormitory at St. Paul's School down in Lawrenceville. So, and he did, as I mentioned earlier, the Unitarian Church. It's lost its dome, but up there in the top of Pantops, there's that. What there is here is what I'm arguing is a tremendously rich heritage that spreads over the years. And that everywhere you look, you will see this. It's not to say that there aren't other wonderful buildings that are in town that are very, very important, but still that this colonial heritage, or what we call colonial, has been a tremendous, tremendous, tremendous element. So with that, and I'm willing to take any questions if anybody has any. Or
Yeah, Richard left us with some time. We usually like to keep about an hour of your time devoted to the program, so we still have a few minutes. So please, anyone have any questions?
When they refer to the Georgian period, what do they mean by that?
this was the time of the Georges on the throne in England, and that overlaps with the colonial here very, very much. But then what I say, and this depends on which book you pick up and so forth, that some architectural historians say, well, the colonial ends with, dump, and then our architecture becomes part of the federal period or the republic period and so forth. But the Georges are still, popping around over there in England and so forth. And again, I can't emphasize enough how much we are the heirs of England in those years. Yes.
As an architect, Richard, do you have a favorite style, and if so, why?
It depends what I'm lecturing on. No, I mean I am. I'm very acey-deucey on this stuff. Do I dare tell you something? I was born in Los Angeles in a house designed by R.M. Schindler, who was one of the great California modernists that designed for my parents, and that's where I was born and grew up. They went on, when I got interested in architectural history and wound up doing my dissertation on Charles McKim and his early work, my mom says, don't do that, that's not right. I mean, in other words, this is traditional, and I was doing traditional stuff rather than, but I've done a lot of modern too, of writing and so forth. You just name it where it is. But unfortunately, once you get here to Charlottesville, they catch it, No, but I mean, I'm acey-deucey on stuff.
Yes, in the back.
So do you have any theories as to why the Federalist and Republican era is clumped into the what becomes colonial?
Well, the thing is that there isn't, there isn't just a change with the politics, you know, with the government and so forth. It continues on. And I can't emphasize too much how much we are the heirs culturally, architecturally of England in those years, and it just continues on. Now, there is something that is going to be going on, and that is those people over there in Paris and the École des Beaux-Arts, and there begins to be some Americans, but the Americans don't begin to go to France really to study art until the 1840s, and so the English influence is still very, 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 very strong in those years. And one way that, of course, you didn't have the internet that was sending pictures back and forth and all of this, but you have the books. And the English architecture books are really the primary thing for Americans. And then when we begin to do our books here, they copied those damn English. I mean, you know, back in those days, you didn't have the way that you have it today, you know, trademark and all of this. And so we copied a lot of those English stuff. And also then to just emphasize that the English architecture books did do, a very famous one was on Palladio. And so there is, it winds around and so forth. Yes, in time, France will take over. And by this period right after the Civil War, I would say that American architecture really does shift more to a French type of thing, to the École des Beaux-Arts, and to more Frenchy types of stuff that comes in. And that becomes the École des Beaux-Arts, the School of Fine Arts in Paris, which has painting, sculpture, decorative arts, and architecture, becomes the model for Americans teaching that, because there really wasn't any schools of architecture that was in England. You just learned by the apprentice system and like that. And so there is this big shift that goes on. As I say, this English influence is really a strong, dominant thing there for many, 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 many years. Yes?
Well, can you tell us anything that distinguishes what you would consider colonial from what you consider federalist? Any distinguishing characteristics?
Not really. Not really. I mean, one thing is that there does begin to be, I would say, I mean, a lot of it just continues right on, but the buildings that they call federal does have a little more sophistication, you might say, in the design and so forth. And
Well, we
so,
seem to get away from the columns.
yeah. Well, he's not Jefferson.
No, not Jefferson. But
I mean, Jefferson is a federal, you know, or he falls under that period there. But I mean, who likes columns better than Jefferson? Right? Yeah.
One of the universities in England and here use a lot of campaniles and towers. Is that part of the architecture that gave prominence to universities?
Yes, well, the campaniles or the towers goes back to the point that Oxbridge, you know what I'm talking about, okay? They were all religiously controlled. Each of the colleges there was under the denomination of, you know, a Anglican, and they had a big chapel. And by God, you went to that chapel every day, and on Sundays you went 3 days, and so forth. And that is very much that's very, very, very much the image of that. And it does come over here, not initially. I mean, Jefferson not going to have anything to do with that, and so forth. But there is a brand new book out by Will Morgan entitled Academia Gothic. Just came out a couple of months ago. I'm reviewing it, which does look at the way that American colleges were transformed beginning around the Civil War up to the Depression, that you begin to get a lot of this English influence cropping up at Yale, Duke University, you name it, that type of thing. And so there's that sort of a shift that goes on there. But that's long after what I'm talking about here.
Is there a question over here?
Yeah, this might be the best one to wrap up with. Is there any Colonial Revival house or building, Richard, in town that really drives you nuts?
Tries to be what?
It really
Drives
drives
you
you your
nuts.
skin, really just, you hate to drive past a hair.
Yes, quite a bit does.
What's one could say?
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I mean, I love. Yeah, I mean. Not the church, no, not the church. But you know, I mean, and I say I have a huge collection of junk that I picked up, of fake Monticellos and you name it, and Mount Vernons and etc. All over the country. That is just, you know, it's very interesting how this has happened and so forth.
What was that building on the right originally?
That was the restaurant for the.
It was originally a restaurant, it wasn't
a restaurant, and the motel was right in back of it there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you like it better now that the dome is gone?
No. No. But I don't think the dome was used for anything. Of course, what was Jefferson's dome used for? Well, anyway. No, but I mean, the dome, yeah, I mean, yes, it's sort of lost a little bit of its character there.
It has.
Well, we will end on that question, so thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for this. Really appreciate it.
Before we go,
Yes, Punky.
I'm Punky File. I'm on the board of the Charlottesville Albemarle Historical Society, and you all have an envelope on your chair. If you have not donated to the society, please do. We need your support to put on programs